The corner booth was his. It had always been his. Julian Thorne did not ask for the corner booth at Valeriano's. It was simply understood that when his car, a black sedan with windows like polished obsidian, pulled up to the curb, the booth would be empty. It would be waiting. Tonight, it waited for two. He checked his watch. A Patek Philippe, a gift to himself from a decade ago when his empire had finally solidified, its steel cool against his skin. 7:47. The arrangement had been for 7:30. Punctuality was a form of respect. Its absence was a message. He smoothed the lapel of his charcoal suit. The fabric was Italian, tailored to fit a frame that was still powerful, even in his late 50s. His hair was more silver than black now, but his eyes were the same. The color of slate before a storm. They miss nothing. His man, Marcus, stood near the entrance, a silent, imposing statue in a dark suit of his own. Marcus did not look at Julian, but they were in constant communication. A slight tilt of the head, a glance, a shift in weight. A language without words developed over 20 years of loyalty and violence. Julian looked at the empty chair across from him. The blind date had been brokered by an associate. A merger of sorts. Not of companies, but of interests. The woman was the daughter of a shipping magnate whose operations brushed against the edges of Julian's own. An alliance solidified by a meal, a conversation, perhaps more. He did not care for such things. His world was built on strength and fear, not polite dinners. But he was old enough to know that sometimes the path of least resistance was the most strategic. A waitress approached his table. He recognized her, vaguely. She had been working here for a few months. Young. Tired. She always looked tired. She refilled his water glass without a word, her hand trembling slightly. He noticed the tremor. He noticed everything. Her uniform was clean but worn, the white cuffs of her sleeves beginning to fray. "Will you be ordering, sir?" she asked. Her voice was soft, fragile. "I am waiting for my guest," he said. The words were clipped, final. An end to the conversation. She nodded, her eyes darting to the empty chair, then back to him. She hesitated. A breach of the unwritten rules of this place. The staff were to be invisible, efficient ghosts who catered to the city's elite. They did not hesitate. He saw the conflict in her face. The desperate need to speak warring with the instinct for self-preservation. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She turned to leave. But then she stopped. Her shoulders slumped, a small, almost imperceptible movement that spoke of utter defeat. She turned back to him, her face pale, her eyes wide with a terror that had nothing to do with him and yet was now directed entirely at him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The sound was barely audible over the clink of silverware and the low murmur of conversation. "They just fired me." Julian did not react. His expression remained unchanged. But inside, a switch was flipped. This was a deviation. A disruption to the ordered rhythm of his evening. He saw Marcus tense near the door, ready to intervene, to remove this disruption. The waitress, this girl, took a shaky breath. She looked at the empty chair opposite him. The chair meant for a woman of power and influence. Then she did the unthinkable. She looked Julian Thorne in the eye. "Your date is not coming," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength from a source he could not identify. "Can I sit down?" The entire restaurant did not fall silent, but in Julian's world, it did. The air thickened. The background noise faded into a dull hum. Marcus took a half step forward. Julian raised a single finger from his lap. A quiet, simple gesture. Marcus froze. The girl's request was absurd. It was suicidal. It was the most honest thing he had heard all week. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. The exhaustion was etched into her skin. The fear in her eyes was old. It was a deep, settled fear that came from a life of constant struggle. He saw a ghost in her face. A flicker of another woman, from another lifetime. A woman named Eleanor. He gestured to the empty chair with his hand. The movement was slow, deliberate. Sit, he said. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next is not about a missed connection. It is about a debt that could never be repaid and a promise that would change everything. If you enjoy stories where the powerful protect the vulnerable, take a moment to like this video and hit subscribe so you never miss a new tale. And let us know in the comments where in the world you are watching from. We love to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's get into it. The girl Saturday. Her name was Clara. She told him this without him asking. She sat on the edge of the plush leather seat as if she expected to be thrown out of it at any moment. Her hands were clasped in her lap so tightly her knuckles were white. They said I was too slow, she said, her gaze fixed on the pristine white tablecloth. A customer complained. Mr. Bianchi. He said I spilled water on his sleeve. She looked up at him, her eyes pleading. I didn't. My hand shook, but I didn't spill a drop. Julian knew Mr. Bianchi. A small-time importer with a large ego. A man who enjoyed the petty cruelties that his minor wealth afforded him. My manager said it was the last straw, Clara continued, her voice trembling again. He gave me my final pay. In cash she gestured to the small, worn purse on her lap. $74. $74. The number hung in the air between them. To Julian, it was nothing. The tip he would leave for a meal he did not even eat. To her, it was the period at the end of a sentence. Julian Thorne was not a man given to sentiment. His empire was built on a foundation of cold logic and calculated force. He controlled the docks, the unions, the quiet transactions that happened in the city's shadows. He was a predator, but one with a code. His code was simple. Debts were honored. His word was his bond. And you did not bring the chaos of their world into the lives of civilians. You did not prey on the weak, the helpless, the ones outside the game. To do so was a sign of weakness, a lack of discipline. It was dishonorable. He had risen from the dirt of the city's forgotten neighborhoods. He remembered hunger. He remembered the specific, gnawing fear of watching his mother count pennies on a kitchen table, her face a mask of quiet desperation. That memory was a cold, hard stone in the pit of his stomach. He had spent his entire life building a fortress around that memory, a fortress of power and wealth so high that no one, least of all himself, would ever have to feel that way again. And yet, here was this girl, this waitress with frayed cuffs and $74 to her name, and she had, with a single desperate question, walked right through the main gate of his fortress and sat down at his table. He had not felt this disarmed in 30 years. Not since Eleanor. Eleanor, with her hopeful eyes and a belief in a goodness in him that he knew he did not possess. She had been a librarian. She smelled of old paper and vanilla. She had looked at him not as a monster or a king, but as a man. She had died in a car accident, a random, senseless act of fate that had nothing to do with his world, and yet it had destroyed his. He had buried his heart with her. He had locked it in a cold, dark vault and thrown away the key. This girl, Clara, had Eleanor's eyes. Not the same color, but the same light. The same fragile hope struggling against a world determined to extinguish it. "Why did you sit down?" he asked. His voice was quiet, devoid of judgment. It was a simple request for information. Clara finally looked away from the tablecloth and at him. Her fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Defiance, perhaps. Or maybe just the exhaustion of having nothing left to lose. "I saw you," she said. "You're always alone. You're quiet. You watch everyone. People are afraid of you. But you're not cruel. I've seen you here for months. You're respectful to the staff. You look people in the eye. You're not like them." She gestured vaguely at the other patrons. The men with loud laughs and wandering hands. The women with sharp, dismissive glances. I don't know what I thought," she admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper again. I just knew I couldn't go home. Not with $74. Why? Julian asked. The single word was a command. Her story came out in a torrent, a dam of composure breaking. It was a story he knew well, in its countless variations. A story of a life lived on the edge of a cliff. She had a son. Leo. He was 6 years old. He had a respiratory condition that required expensive medication, frequent doctor visits. She was a single mother. The boy's father was a ghost, a faded photograph. She worked 2 jobs, this one, and another cleaning offices downtown late at night. She lived in a small apartment in a part of the city he owned, though she would not know that. The building was managed by a man named Silas Croft. Julian's face remained impassive, but at the mention of that name, a cold stillness settled over him. Silas Croft. A slumlord. A loan shark who operated on the fringes, preying on the very people Julian's code implicitly protected. Croft was not one of his. He was a leech, a bottom feeder who had been allowed to operate because he was small, insignificant. A nuisance, but not yet a problem. Clara's rent was late. She had taken a small loan from Croft a few months ago to cover a hospital bill for Leo. The interest rate was criminal. She had been paying, but it was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. Now, with this job gone, she would default. He said, she faltered, her face flushing with shame. He said if I couldn't pay with money, there were other ways. He's coming by tomorrow. For his payment. The air in the corner booth grew 10 degrees colder. The unspoken threat was clear. It was vile. It was a violation of the most fundamental rule. Julian looked past her, his gaze finding Marcus by the door. Marcus, who had been watching them with a carefully neutral expression, met his eyes. Julian gave a minuscule, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. Marcus understood. The evening's plans had changed. Julian turned his attention back to Clara. The frantic energy had left her. She was just a hollowed-out shell of a person, her story told, her last bit of hope spent. She looked down at her hands, expecting him to dismiss her, to call for security, to have her removed like the trash she had been made to feel she was. He remembered his mother's hands. Chapped from cleaning other people's houses. He remembered the shame of wearing shoes with holes in them. He remembered the cold fury he had felt toward a world that allowed good people to suffer while vermin like Silas Croft thrived. He had built his empire to escape that world. But he had never forgotten it. "What is your son's name?" he asked. She looked up, surprised by the question. "Leo," she said softly. "Leo," Julian repeated the name. It felt solid. Real. A tether to the world he had long since left behind. He made a decision. It was not a logical decision. It was not a profitable one. It broke a dozen of his own rules about involvement, about exposure. It was a decision born from the ghost of a dead woman and the memory of a desperate mother counting pennies. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and removed a pen and a small, leather-bound notebook. He wrote down a number. He tore the page out and pushed it across the table toward her. "This is the number of a doctor," he said. His voice was firm, a stark contrast to her trembling whisper. "He is the best pediatric pulmonologist in the city. His name is Dr. Alistair Finch. An appointment has been made for your son for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. A car will pick you and Leo up at 8-inch. Clara stared at the piece of paper as if it were a burning coal. I can't afford." "Dr. Finch's services have been retained," Julian cut her off, his tone leaving no room for argument. "His bill will be handled. Your only concern is getting your son there." She looked from the paper to his face, her own a canvas of disbelief and confusion. "Why? Why are you doing this?" Julian leaned back in the booth. The leather creaked softly. He thought of Eleanor. He thought of his mother. He thought of the man he had been before he became Julian Thorne. "My guest was a no-show," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You were kind enough to fill her seat. I am returning the courtesy. It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. The truth was too complicated, too buried in the past." He signaled for a waiter. A different one. The restaurant manager, a man named Lorenzo who had been in Julian's employ for 15 years, scurried over, his face a mask of anxiety. "Lorenzo," Julian said, his voice calm. "This young lady will not be working here anymore. She has found a better position. Please ensure her final paperwork is processed with a full month severance. And add a bonus for her excellent service." Lorenzo's eyes widened, but he nodded quickly. "Of course, Mr. Thorne." "Immediately." Julian then looked back at Clara. "Go home to your son," he said. It was not a suggestion. It was a command. But it was the gentlest command he had given in years. "Do not worry about Mr. Croft. He will not be coming tomorrow. He will not be coming ever again." She stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. They were not tears of sadness or fear anymore. They were tears of confusion, of a hope so overwhelming it was painful. "But how?" "Some debts are not paid with money," he said simply. He stood up, the motion fluid and commanding. He placed a few $100 bills on the table, more than enough to cover the water and the trouble. He looked down at her one last time. "The car will be a black sedan. Do not be late." Without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit, Marcus falling into step behind him. As they stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights glittering like a carpet of fallen stars, Marcus spoke for the first time. "Silas Croft?" he asked, his voice a low murmur. Julian did not look at him. He looked out at the city he owned. His city. "Get me everything we have on him," Julian said, his voice like chips of ice. "And get Nico and Vincent. I want to pay Mr. Croft a visit. Tonight." Marcus nodded. "And the girl?" Julian paused, his hand on the car door. He thought of her sitting in his booth, small and terrified, but with a spine of steel he recognized. He thought of the name of her son. "Leo." "The girl is under my protection now," he said. The word settled in the air, absolute and irrevocable. "See that everyone understands that." As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the warm glow of Valeriano's behind, Julian stared out the window, his reflection a pale mask superimposed over the blur of the city. He had not intended for any of this. He had come for a business meeting. A sterile alliance. Instead, he had found a ghost. And in doing so, he had started a war. A small war, to be sure, but a war nonetheless. A war against a single, worthless man for the sake of a single, tired waitress. It made no sense. It was bad for business. It was illogical. And it was the most right he had felt in 30 years. The file on Silas Croft was thin, but ugly. It was delivered to Julian's penthouse office by Marcus within the hour. Julian sat behind a massive desk of dark mahogany, the city sprawling out behind him through a floor-to-ceiling window. The room was his sanctuary, a place of monastic quiet and absolute control. There were no photographs, save for one. A small, silver-framed picture of a smiling woman with hopeful eyes, kept on a side table where the light did not often reach. Marcus laid the folder on the desk. "Not much to him," Marcus said. "Small time. Owns 3 tenement buildings in the Narrows. Uses them as leverage for his loan business. Standard predatory tactics. Target single mothers, new immigrants. People with no recourse." Julian opened the folder. He did not need to read much. The complaints, the threats, the exorbitant interest rates. It was a familiar pattern of cowardice. Croft was a hyena, picking off the weakest members of the herd. "He has no affiliation?" Julian asked, his eye scanning a list of known associates. "None," Marcus confirmed. "He pays his dues to the Ricky family for operating territory, but he's not a made man. He's a civilian, by all accounts. A particularly nasty 1-inch. A civilian. The word hung in the air. Julian's code was clear about civilians. But Croft had violated that status. He had crossed a line that was invisible to most but was etched in stone in Julian's world. He had brought threats of a physical, personal nature against a woman to collect a debt. It was not business. It was filth. Where is he now? Julian asked, closing the folder. The decision had already been made. This was simply logistics. His office. A converted warehouse on the east side, Marcus replied. Nico and Vincent are 5 minutes out. They're awaiting your instructions. Nico and Vincent were his instruments. They were quiet, efficient men who understood his orders without needing them elaborated. They were the physical manifestation of his will. Tell them to secure the location. No one in or out. I want them to cut the communications. Then they wait for me, Julian commanded. He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the river of headlights flowing through the city's arteries. And Marcus. Find the deed to Clara's apartment building. I want it on my desk by morning. It might take some persuasion, Marcus noted. I am confident Silas will be in a cooperative mood, Julian said, his reflection staring back at him from the dark glass. The drive to the east side was silent. Julian sat in the back of the sedan, the city's glamour giving way to grit and decay. The streetlights here were dimmer, many of them broken. The buildings were hunched and tired. This was the part of the city the postcards ignored. It was the part of the city that had made him. The warehouse was a squat, brick building at the end of a deserted street. A single light burned in a second-floor window. Nico's car was parked in the shadows across the street. As Julian's sedan pulled up, Nico and Vincent emerged from the darkness. They were large men, dressed in dark work coats, their faces grim and professional. The place is quiet, Nico said as Julian stepped out of the car. Just him and a desk jockey. We sent the other one home. Croft is upstairs. Julian nodded. Wait here. He walked toward the entrance, Marcus at his side. The door was unlocked. The ground floor was filled with old machinery covered in tarps, the air thick with the smell of dust and oil. A set of rickety metal stairs led to the second-floor office. Julian ascended the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He did not try to be quiet. He wanted Croft to hear him coming. The office was a mess. Piles of paper, overflowing ashtrays, a half-eaten pizza on a filing cabinet. Silas Croft was a man whose life was as slovenly as his business practices. He was a portly man in his 40s, with a sweaty brow and small, greedy eyes. He was on the phone, yelling at someone. I don't care what she said. You tell her I'm coming tomorrow, and if she doesn't have my money, he stopped mid-sentence. He had finally noticed the 2 men standing in his doorway. 2 men in immaculate suits who did not belong in his world of grime and desperation. He looked at Julian. Recognition did not dawn on him. He had no reason to know Julian Thorne by sight. He just saw power. And danger. Who the hell are you? Croft blustered, trying to project an authority he did not feel. This is a private office. Julian walked slowly into the room, his eyes taking in every sordid detail. He stopped in front of the desk. He did not look at Croft. He looked at the paperwork scattered across it. Loan agreements. Eviction notices. A ledger of misery. Silas Croft, Julian said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. It was the voice he used before things became unpleasant. Croft's eyes narrowed. Do I know you? You know a woman named Clara, Julian stated. It was not a question. She has a son named Leo. She lives at 214 Elm Street. An apartment in a building you own. Croft's face shifted from confusion to a dawning, sickening understanding. He had crossed a line, he just didn't know which one. His bluster evaporated, replaced by a film of sweat. Yeah, so? she's behind on her payments. It's business, he stammered, his eyes darting toward the door, as if calculating an escape route that no longer existed. No, Julian said, his voice dropping, becoming harder. This is business, he gestured to the ledger. Charging a desperate woman 200% interest. That is usury. That is theft. But we can overlook such things. It is the nature of a certain kind of commerce. He then leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the desk. The movement was slow, deliberate, and full of menace. He finally met Croft's eyes. But when you threaten her, when you suggest she pay her debt with her body, that is no longer business, Julian said, his voice a low, venomous hiss. That is an offense. An offense against decency. An offense against the rules. What rules? Croft squeaked, shrinking back in his chair. I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't. You are a bottom feeder, Mr. Croft, Julian continued, ignoring the denial. You feed on the scraps, on the people who have no one to protect them. You believe this makes you smart. It does not. It makes you a coward. Julian straightened up. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. It was Clara's loan agreement. He had taken it from her file on the desk. He held it up between two fingers. This debt, he said, is cancelled. He then produced a lighter. A simple, elegant silver lighter. He flicked it open, the flame a bright, hungry thing in the dim office. He touched the flame to the corner of the paper. It caught fire, curling into black ash. He held it until the flames licked at his fingertips, then dropped the last burning remnants into a glass ashtray. Her debt is paid, he said. Croft stared, mesmerized and terrified. You can't do that. I just did, Julian replied. He turned to Marcus. The deed. Marcus stepped forward and placed a fresh set of legal documents on the desk, along with a pen. The title transfer for 214 Elm Street, Marcus said to Croft. You will be signing ownership of the building over to a holding corporation. Effective immediately. Croft looked at the papers, then back at Julian, his face a mask of disbelief. You're insane. That building is worth $500,000. It is the price of your education, Julian said coldly. A lesson in the cost of dishonor. You will sign it. And then you will pack a bag. You will leave this city tonight. You will not come back. You will not contact anyone you have ever done business with here. Your operations are closed. Permanently. Croft just stared, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The sheer audacity of the demand was too much for his small, greedy mind to comprehend. And if I don't, he whispered, a final, pathetic spark of defiance. Julian smiled. It was not a pleasant sight. It was a baring of teeth. Mr. Croft, he said softly. You have spent your life preying on people who have no choice. Tonight, for the first time, you are one of them. You have no choice. Sign the paper. The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was the frantic beating of Silas Croft's own heart. He looked at Julian's cold, unforgiving eyes. He looked at the silent, mountain-like figures of Marcus, and through the door, Nico and Vincent. He saw the end of his world. His hand trembled violently as he reached for the pen. His signature was a spidery, illegible scrawl. When he was done, Marcus took the papers, checked them, and put them in his briefcase. Julian looked at the pathetic, broken man in the chair. He felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction. Just the cold, clean feeling of a mess being tidied up. A wrong being righted. You will not be bothering anyone ever again, Julian said. It was a statement of fact. A prophecy. He turned and walked out of the office, not looking back. Marcus followed. The sounds of Nico and Vincent entering the room as they left were muted, professional. They would ensure Mr. Croft understood the permanence of his departure. The following morning, Clara stood on the sidewalk outside her building, holding Leo's small hand in hers. Leo was bundled in a warm coat, his breathing a little raspy, but his eyes bright with the excitement of an unexpected adventure. Exactly at 8 o'clock, a black sedan, identical to the one from the night before, pulled up to the curb. The back door opened. Clara hesitated for a moment, then, taking a deep breath, she helped Leo into the car and slid in beside him. The interior was silent, luxurious, a world away from the city bus she normally took. The appointment with Dr. Finch was like a dream. The office was calm and welcoming. The doctor was a kind, elderly man with a gentle smile who treated Leo not as a set of symptoms, but as a little boy. He was patient, thorough, and by the end of the examination, he had laid out a new treatment plan. He had prescribed a different medication, a new type of inhaler, and a series of follow-up appointments. "This will make a significant difference, Miss Clara," he had said, patting Leo's shoulder. "We will manage this. He will be able to run and play like any other boy." When she went to the receptionist's desk to ask about the bill, a question she was dreading, the woman simply smiled. "There is no bill for you, dear. It has all been taken care of." Walking out of the medical building into the bright morning sun, Clara felt a sense of relief so profound it made her dizzy. For the first time in years, the crushing weight on her chest had lifted, just a little. But the confusion remained. Why? The car was waiting to take them home. When they arrived back at her building, she saw another man in a suit waiting by the entrance. Not the terrifying, silent one from the restaurant, but a younger man with a briefcase. He introduced himself as a representative of the building's new ownership. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a legal document. She read it, then read it again, her mind struggling to comprehend the words. It was the deed to her apartment. Her apartment. Signed over to her. The line for the purchase price was marked simply, "Paid in full." Tucked behind the deed was another piece of paper. It was her loan agreement with Silas Croft. Stamped across it in thick red ink were 2 words, "Debt cancelled." She sank onto the steps of her own building, the papers clutched in her hand. Leo, seeing his mother cry, wrapped his small arms around her neck. "Is it okay, Mommy?" She hugged him tightly, burying her face in his coat. "It's okay, baby," she sobbed. "Everything is going to be okay." Later that evening, there was a soft knock on her door. She opened it to find Julian Thorne standing in the hallway. He was dressed not in a suit, but in dark trousers and a simple, cashmere sweater. He looked less like a king in his castle and more like an ordinary man. Almost. "May I come in?" he asked. She stepped back, allowing him into her small, tidy living room. It was a humble space, but it was filled with a love that was palpable. A child's drawings were taped to the refrigerator. A stack of library books sat on the coffee table. He did not sit. He just stood in the center of the room, looking around. His eyes lingered on the drawings. "Mr. Croft is gone," he said, his voice quiet. "The building has new management. Your home is yours. No one will ever threaten to take it from you again." Clara stood before him, the deed and the cancelled loan in her hand. "I don't understand," she said, her voice thick with emotion. This is too much. I can't accept this. I have to pay you back. I don't have much, but I can. I will work for the rest of my life to." "No," he interrupted gently. "You will not. You will raise your son. You will find a job that respects you. You will live your life without fear. That is the only payment required." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face again. "But why? Why me?" Julian looked at her, and for a moment, the mask of the powerful crime lord fell away, and she saw the man underneath. A man who looked tired. A man who looked sad. "A long time ago," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I knew someone. Someone who believed that a single act of kindness could change the world. She was wrong about the world. But she might have been right about a person." He looked at the drawing on the fridge. A crayon portrait of a smiling woman holding hands with a little boy. "You gave me something last night, Clara," he said. "Something worth more than any building, more than any amount of money. You reminded me of something I thought I had lost forever." Leo, who had been hiding shyly behind his mother's legs, peeked out. He looked up at the tall, serious man in his living room. "Are you a good guy?" he asked, his small voice cutting through the heavy emotion in the room. Julian looked down at the boy. A genuine, small smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, erasing years of hardness. He crouched down, bringing himself to Leo's level. "I'm not sure," he said honestly. "But tonight, because of your mother, I got to be." He reached into his pocket and pulled out not a weapon or a roll of cash, but a simple, blank business card. On it, he wrote a phone number. He handed it to Clara. "This is my personal number," he said, his voice regaining its familiar authority. "If you or Leo ever need anything at all, you call this number. Do you understand?" She nodded, speechless, taking the card as if it were a holy relic. He stood up, his business concluded. He walked to the door, then paused. "Get some rest, Clara," he said. And then he was gone. She stood in her living room, in her home, holding a promise of safety in one hand and the proof of her freedom in the other. The city outside was still loud and dangerous, but for the first time, she felt safe within its walls. She felt protected. Years passed. 5 of them. Leo was 11 now. His lungs were strong. He was the fastest runner in his class. He played soccer in the park every Saturday. Clara had gone back to school. She became a paralegal, working for a firm that specialized in tenant rights, fighting for people who were trapped in the same situation she had once been. She never had to use the number Julian gave her, but she kept the card in a small box with her most precious things. Sometimes, on quiet nights, she would take it out and look at the number, a silent testament to the night a stranger changed her life. Julian Thorne was older. The silver in his hair had claimed all the black. He still ran his empire with an iron fist, but those closest to him, like Marcus, had noticed a change. A softening at the edges. A willingness to fund a new wing for the children's hospital. An anonymous scholarship fund for single mothers. Small, quiet acts of grace that were never traced back to him. He still sat in the corner booth at Valeriano's from time to time. He always sat alone. In his penthouse office, high above the city, everything was the same. The dark mahogany desk. The floor-to-ceiling window. The single, silver-framed photograph of Eleanor on the side table. But there was one new addition. On the corner of his otherwise empty desk, in a simple black frame, was a child's drawing. It was done in crayon. It depicted a small stick figure with a wide smile, holding the hand of a much taller, darker stick figure. Underneath, in a child's messy scrawl, were the words, "Leo and the good guy." It was the first thing Julian saw every morning when he sat down, and the last thing he saw every night before he left. A memento. A reminder. For in a world of shadows and hard choices, Julian Thorne had learned a profound truth that night in the restaurant. True power was not the ability to take, to control, or to intimidate. True power was the ability to protect. It was the strength to shield a single flickering flame from the wind, to ensure that a small boy could grow up safe, and to give a good woman a life free from fear. It was a lesson he had learned too late for Eleanor, but one he had been given a second chance to practice, all because a tired waitress had been brave enough to sit down.